The history of European currencies is a very interesting topic, and that's why I've dedicated my time to it. See, from the earliest precious metal exchanges to the Bretton Woods Agreement between several European countries, there have been many monetary developments and changes made throughout history. Sadly, I don't have all the time in the world to discuss them all today, so I'm just going to focus on a few. The British pound sterling, the German mark, and the French franc. The franc is actually not where we begin in France. We begin much earlier with what was called the livre.
The livre was a unit of account that was created by Charlemagne in 781. It was equal to exactly 1 pound of silver. The livre continues to be used as a unit of account and as a coin. A unit of account meaning it was used to measure the values of different things against each other. It continued to be used in this way from 781 all the way up to 1794, coexisting with the other currencies such as the franc.
The first use of the franc coin was, of course, much later than this, as the numerous livres served stable enough to not destroy the French economy. The first use of the franc coin was in fact in 1360, when it was used to pay off the ransom for King John II of France.
Charles V was one of the first Frankish kings to try to actually stabilize coinage. In 1365, he made an edict that created a gold coin called the denier, which, like the francs of the time, was equal to exactly 1 livre. This coin universally became to be known as the franc à pied. Due to the influx of gold and silver from the New World to Europe, inflation was kicking in. The kings tried to take advantage of this by just continuously readjusting the value of the money in their favor, until finally, in 1577, Henry III was called out on this by the Estates General that met in Blois at the end of the year prior. He essentially revived the franc at its original value of 1 livre tournois.
Finally, in 1795, things got a whole lot less confusing at the French Revolutionary Convention when they made the French franc a national currency. It was a decimal currency, which meant that it was worth exactly 4.5 grams of fine silver.
Metallic currencies' use declined during the Republic. Some of the old gold and silver coins were taken out of circulation in exchange for printed money. They were originally just issued as bonds that were backed up by the value of the confiscated goods of the churches. They were later made legal tender. The gold and silver that was taken out of circulation was used to finance the war and to import food for the country.
The Great War also had a devastating effect on the franc, as it did on most countries' economies. You see, the cost of the war caused inflation. The cost of post-war reconstruction caused inflation, and it was because they just started printing more and more money to cope with all the losses they had. Um, Incredibly, between 1915 and 1920, the value of the purchasing power of the franc was reduced by an incredible 70%. And this continued because from 1922 to 1926, the purchasing power was decreased by another 43%. This continued through World War II.
During World War II, France was occupied by the Nazis. During this time, the franc was another currency used alongside the German mark, valued at 20 francs for 1 Reichsmark. The coins were also changed, replacing the original liberty, equality, and fraternity with work, family, and fatherland.
Again in 1960, as it has happened many times before, the franc was revalued.
This revaluing led to the creation of the nouveau franc, which was worth 100 of the pre-existing francs. This was plagued with more inflation. By 1999, when the euro was introduced, the franc was worth less than an eighth of its 1960 value.
The earliest uses of the mark were in northern Germany and Scandinavia, and it was worth the equivalent of about 16 skillings or shillings. But the mark didn't really get used until the unification of Germany by Otto von Bismarck.
The gold mark was the first currency that was adopted, and it was used on a gold standard, with 1 mark being worth about 358 milligrams of gold. It was commonly just called the mark.
In 1914, the mark really started to go south with the outbreak of the Great War. The gold mark was now being called the paper mark because there was no really direct connection anymore between the value of the gold mark and the value of gold, which it used to be based off of.
By 1923, because of the reparations that Germany had to pay because of World War I, the paper mark was virtually worthless and was once again replaced with the Renton mark, which was worth 1 billion paper marks. And to put this into context, it took 4.2 Renton marks to make up $1.
Now on to World War II. As this happened way too many times in the past, a new type of mark was created. It was called the occupation mark or military mark.
The military mark, which started being printed in 1944 by the Allies, was being printed to be used to pay soldiers' wages and for occupying forces to make purchases in Germany.
In 1948, Germany was, of course, split into two different countries, West Germany and East Germany. And naturally, just to confuse us, this had to come with two different currencies, both called the Deutschmark, but in English it was called the West German mark and the East German mark. Finally, in 1990, when Germany was reunited, so were the currencies. And then the East German mark just sort of combined with the West German mark, and only the West German Deutschmark was used. The pound actually started out as a unit of account in Anglo-Saxon England, which was in the 5th century. The pound was worth 240 silver pennies, or 1 pound of silver, hence the name pound. This is in fact the oldest currency still in use.
The earliest pennies were struck from fine silver, but starting in 1158, under King Henry II, they were struck from 92.5% silver. This came to be known as sterling silver and was used up until the 20th century. Silver was pretty much the only standard used until 1344, when the gold noble was put into circulation.
The Bank of England was founded in 1694, and the Bank of Scotland was founded the next year in 1695. And both these banks began to print paper currency for the first time in their respective countries. These were called notes.
The pound Scots, Scotland's currency, which once had the same value as the pound sterling, suffered from devaluation until it was set at an exchange rate of 12 pound Scots to 1 pound sterling. Once Scotland and England created Great Britain, Scotland's currency began to be replaced by the English pound sterling.
In 1801, the kingdoms of Ireland and Great Britain were united.
Ireland and Great Britain's currencies were much closer in value. They were set at 13 Irish pounds for 12 pounds sterling, and the Irish pounds continued to exist until 1826.
In 1816, the gold standard was fully adopted in Great Britain, getting rid of the previous silver standard. This meant that all of the currency in Great Britain was measured in its value of gold rather than its value in silver. The gold standard was suspended in 1914 at the outbreak of World War I. Prior to World War I, England had one of the world's strongest economies, but after the war, they owed over 850 million euros to other countries, most of this money being owed to the US. England actually tried reinstigating the gold standard about 10 years later in 1925, but it really didn't work and it only lasted until the Depression in 1931. In 1940, an agreement was made between the US and Great Britain, making the euro worth exactly $4.03 in US dollars. This was even used in the Bretton Woods Agreement.
The Bretton Woods Agreement was the first fully organized monetary system that was used to govern monetary relations between different countries. It was established towards the end of World War II in July of 1944.
Finally, in 1949, the US devalued the euro by 30.5% making 1 US dollar worth 2.8 euros. During this time, the US also devalued a lot of other countries' currencies. Thank you for watching this Ben Kearns original documentary on the history of some of the currencies in Europe. This episode focused on the British pound, the German mark, and the French franc. And that is a wrap, people. Man, I can finally stop pretending to... What do you mean the camera's still on? Wait,